Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Carla Wiens, CEO of the Swift Current District Chamber of Commerce. Your local chamber is very pleased to host this evening's All Candidates Forum. Our goal is to provide our residents an opportunity to meet all of our candidates to make an informed decision for this federal election. Many thanks to all of the candidates for attending this evening. We look forward to learning about each of you and your respective platforms. The format for this evening is fairly simple. Each candidate will make an introductory speech, which will be followed by a question period. There are stationary mics in the aisles for this purpose. Please remember that this is an information forum, not a debate. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to respond to each and every question, so please don't direct your questions to one specific candidate. It is now my pleasure to introduce this evening's moderator, Mr. Steve Kreitzer, Regional Crown Prosecutor.
Thank you very much for attending tonight's forum. Those of you who are taking time out of hauling tree branches out of your backyard to come out, we appreciate that. We are in our first election in 19 years since we've had an incumbent on the slate. This is the first one without an incumbent. So a very exciting debate. We're going to get right to it so that we don't take any time away from our candidates. The first candidate to present to us in a 10-minute format will be Jeremy Patzer with the Conservative Party.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you for everyone for coming out this evening. My name is Jeremy Patzer and I'm the Conservative Party candidate for this upcoming election. My wife and I, we live here in Swift Current along with our 3 kids. I've been out on the campaign trail since March, beginning with the nomination process that we went through with the party, where I was chosen by our membership in the riding to be the candidate for this election. Over the past 8 months traveling the riding, people and businesses have made it quite clear we cannot afford another 4 years of Liberal government. They are all frustrated by the lack of respect for Western Canada and the main industries that help drive our economy. Remember when Justin Trudeau and Bill Morneau, the finance minister, they called small businesses tax cheats, and that small businesses were just a way for the wealthy to shield their wealth. The fact is that small businesses make up around 90% of all businesses in Canada and provide jobs for millions of people across the country. The last 4 years have seen higher payroll taxes, higher taxes on business investments, taxes on spouses and family members within the business and within the farm, and of course, a carbon tax. Increases in EI and CPP have prevented businesses from hiring more staff, as the cost of keeping existing employees keeps going up while revenues, they go down. These are some of the factors that have combined to drive business investment in Canada down 8% over the past 4 years. A Conservative government will reduce these payroll taxes, scrap the carbon tax, increase the capital gains exemption to encourage growth and investment into your business and farm, and also exempt spouses from taxes on small business dividends. We'll implement a 2-for-1 deal for new regulations so we can reduce the amount of outdated and ineffective regulations that exist. The Liberals added over 4,300 new regulations to businesses, making it harder and harder for small businesses to succeed. Conservatives recognize that you've invested your life into your business and that you should be rewarded for working hard, and at the end of the day, you should have more of your own money in your pocket. Fiscal responsibility has been one of the most important issues to the constituents of this riding. A Conservative government will eliminate $1.5 billion in corporate welfare every year. Bombardier and the Irving family don't deserve to be given your tax dollars as handouts. We have a plan to balance the budget with a focus on economic growth and eliminating wasteful handouts and spending. People are looking around at all the money that has been wasted on new fridges for Loblaws, tweeting out multi-million-dollar pledges to Hollywood celebrities, $10.5 million given to an admitted terrorist, and not to mention the billions of dollars that have gone out to groups internationally that have direct ties to terrorist organizations. All of this while our veterans have been told that they are asking for more than they can give, followed by cutting funding to hospitals when they provide care to military members. Conservatives will strengthen transition services to support discharged or retired Canadian Armed Forces members, as well as create a reliable, dependable pension system that is fair to Canada's most disabled veterans. Agriculture and the energy sector are 2 of the biggest sources of employment and business in the riding, and they have suffered over the last 4 years. Around Cypress Hills Grasslands, agriculture and energy-based businesses are vital to the success of our communities. A Conservative government will support these key industries that provide employment and business opportunities to Canadians across the country. We have a plan to unite Canadians with the National Energy Corridor, a project that will bring jobs and certainty to the energy sector. With this project, we'll be able to responsibly move Canadian oil to our refineries, get our product to Tidewater, where we'll be able to get a fair price and no longer have to accept lower prices compared to the world market. One of the biggest gains that we will have with the energy corridor is to become energy independent by 2030. In 2013, we spent $26 billion importing foreign oil, which represented 43% of all the oil that we used in Canada that year. So some of the countries that we import from are Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, countries that have a horrible record when it comes to human rights and their environmental responsibility. With the corridor, we'll be able to efficiently move all types of energy across Canada, whether it be oil and gas, Quebec's hydropower, renewable energy products, or even nuclear power, which represents 15% of electricity in Canada. The corridor will also provide a means to grow and expand our rural broadband internet connections in both a fixed and wireless format. This area needs to grow so that way we can promote our businesses, because that's an ever-changing environment that they're facing in the digital world. We'll work to restore trading relationships with China, India, and Italy. I've heard from different agricultural groups that this is their biggest concern. Farmers would rather have market access restored and maintained instead of government loans that actually don't address the issue. Our previous Conservative government signed 53 new trade deals with more than 50 countries. Andrew Scheer is the only leader in this election that can strengthen our trade relationships. Our international trade has been hurt and reduced these last 4 years by individuals who have been careless in their actions, and our farmers and small businesses, they're the ones who have been taking the brunt of that. We are committed to ensuring that all cabinet decisions have a rural perspective and that government programs consider the life conditions and unique experiences of Canadians in rural areas. Conservatives are committed to supporting and expanding healthcare with our provinces. We are committed to maintaining and increasing the Canada Health Transfer and Canada Social Transfer by at least 3% per year as part of our health and social program guarantee. We are also investing $1.5 billion into new MRI and CT scan machines to help our hospitals be able to reduce the wait times, because wait times have been an issue for a very long time here. Canadians will be able to count on stable and predictable healthcare funding to ensure we have a quality healthcare system in every province and territory. Lastly, a Conservative government will work to immediately restore the fairness, order, and compassion of the immigration system. We will stand up for families and ensure that spouses and children can be reunited. We will improve language training and credential recognition so that newcomers can succeed economically and socially. We will ensure that our system prioritizes people facing persecution and focus government sponsorship on the victims of the 4 atrocity crimes. We'll also do more to promote private sponsorship of refugees, as we have seen here in Swift Current, the very benefits of welcoming in refugee families in this way. So thank you everybody for coming out tonight. Appreciate your time, and it's time for you to get ahead. So vote Conservative, October 21st.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. Now we'll hear from Trevor Peterson, representing the NDP.
I would like to thank all of you for joining us this evening. I'd like to thank the Chamber for organizing this event and Steve for moderating. I would also like to thank all the candidates for putting their name forward. I grew up on a family farm near Central Butte right here in Cypress Hills Grasslands, and I've spent my entire life in rural Saskatchewan. I've spent the last 26 years teaching, raising my family, and volunteering in my community. And I will tell you that rural small town Saskatchewan is a great place to raise a family. But rural Saskatchewan and small towns are struggling. Decades of Liberal and Conservative governments have made life easier for the super rich and the massive corporations and harder for the rest of us. The Liberals made big promises in 2011. And Canadians haven't got the real changes they were told were coming. We've had 50 years of studies and 22 years of promises. Still, no national pharmacare program, no child care program, and more taxes for the multinationals. The Conservatives, on the other hand, are offering up the same old tired Stephen Harper playbook. And Canadians aren't interested in mean cuts and mean-spirited politics. Now, Jeremy talks about compassion for immigration and foreign policy, but yet his leader is going to cut foreign aid by 25%. And we give less than 3% in gross national income to foreign aid. Now, as someone who has volunteered in Rwanda with my wife and my children, I can tell you that that foreign aid is very important. And when we make those cuts, how many kids are not going to get educated or vaccinated? And these investing in people in Canada and around the world is not an expense. It's an investment. Now, Jeremy has also talked about, Stephen Harper being the only person to balance the budget. Okay? But it took him 7 years before he could. We had 7 deficits. Now, how did he balance that budget? Well, Jeremy talks about these payroll taxes. Well, my understanding is the Canada Pension, we pay into Canada Pension Fund, and we pay into EI. And these are funds that we use to make sure we got a comfortable retirement and in case we have trouble in the future with employment. And how did Stephen Harper try to balance the budget in 2015? Well, I can understand why Jeremy considers it a tax when it's not a payroll tax, because Stephen Harper did use it like a tax. He stole $1.8 billion from our EI fund to try and balance his budget in 2015. Only the well-connected have gotten ahead under the Liberals and Conservatives. Wages have been stagnant. We are working harder, longer, and are more productive. But we're not seeing the benefits. It's the richest 1% who have captured 33% of the income gains in Canada's economic growth. Heck, they own 2/3 of the assets. And what have the Liberals and Conservatives done? Taxes for large corporations have been cut 10 times since the year 2000. A combined cut of nearly 50%. We haven't seen those tax cuts. Over $700 billion in lost revenue. Jeremy talks about welfare, corporate welfare, and the Liberals with their corporate welfare. That's like the pot calling the kettle black, in my opinion. Well-to-do Canadians have hidden up to $240 billion in foreign accounts and are dodging up to $3 billion a year in federal taxes on those funds. This is revenue that could be used to invest in Canadians. And worst of all, these corporate tax cuts do not create economic growth as promised. $1 in corporate tax cuts produce only 20 cents in economic activity. Now, on the other hand, spending on infrastructure, income supports for workers, families, students, First Nations, new Canadians, investing in Canadians, that creates economic activity. For every dollar we invest in Canadians, we produce $1.45 in economic activity. Because of these corporate tax cuts, the Liberals and Conservatives have tried to balance the budget on the backs of low and middle income Canadians, like you and me. They're looking out for big corporations, like SNC Lavalin. We all know SNC Lavalin. We remember the Liberal fiasco of a year ago. But do you remember the SNC Lavalin affair of 2011? Then Prime Minister Stephen Harper agreed to sell the reactor division of the country's billion-dollar crown corporation, Atomic Energy of Canada. To who? SNC Lavalin. Oh, Canadian taxpayers weren't guaranteed any money from that sale. SNC Lavalin gave Harper $15 million. Harper gave them $75 million and $1.1 billion worth of assets. This deal should sound familiar if you're a farmer in the room. It's very similar to the sweetheart deal Mr. Harper and Mr. Anderson gave the Saudis when they sold the Canadian Wheat Board. Instead of investing in programs that will keep us working and making life more affordable, they continue to give tax breaks and giveaways to the wealthiest income earners. Now, New Democrats are in it for you. We're on the side of working Canadians, not big corporations and lobbyists. Now, the NDP is offering a new deal for people, expanding Medicare to include a national pharmacare program, universal dental and vision care, mental health care for all. No more studies or promises. Build 500,000 new homes to erase the housing crunch. lower cell phone and internet bills, reduce childcare costs with an initial investment of $1 billion working towards a national childcare program. The NDP's plan would immediately drop the interest rates on Canada's student loans and work towards non-repayable grants to a future where post-secondary education is part and fully part of the public education system. So kids can go from kindergarten to a career with no barrier for cost. Now, how will we pay for this, you ask? Well, we're going to do something the Liberals and Conservatives would never consider. We'll ask the billionaires and the large multinational corporations to pay their fair share. We'll crack down on overseas tax havens, and there's some liberals and past Liberals and Conservatives that have links to these tax havens, as we've seen in the news lately. We'll work to close tax loopholes, and we'll charge just 1% on wealth over $20 million. I think they'll get by. Now, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has said that this wealth tax will add $700 billion in revenue in just 10 years. And we're worried about cutting foreign aid by $2 billion. We will also increase taxes on large corporations back to 18%. That's where they were in 2010. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about climate change. Now, I realize climate change is a difficult issue here in Southwest Saskatchewan. People are worried about their jobs, they're worried about their livelihood. And you know what? They should be. They know that during this transition to a green economy, that the mainstream parties will be too focused looking out for the well-connected and large corporations. Corporations like SNC-Lavalin and, of course, Loblaws. We need a climate strategy that will invest and support workers, families, students, small businesses in making the transition to a green economy. A strategy that will benefit all parts of the country and all sectors of the economy, including agriculture and energy. Now, speaking of agriculture, driving on the way here, I'm looking at these fields, and I mean, we're going to have a heck of a time getting these crops off. But it makes me wonder, who gutted ag stability? It was Mr. Ritz, with no consultation. So what are we going to do for climate change? Our policy, create 300 new jobs. We'll save families approximately $1,000 per year with energy retrofits. We'll create a Canada Climate Bank to make meaningful investments. We will allow workers to quit their job and still get EI to go back to school for new job markets. Mr. Scheer's plan? Make larger roads. Where was he when the Sask Party was making the Regina bypass? We wouldn't have any trouble transporting these farm machinery. And Justin Trudeau? Well, he's too busy giving free refrigerators to Loblaws. No, what we need in Cypress Hills Grasslands and what we need in Ottawa is a party that will stand up for you, that will work for you. Lost my spot.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Actually, the 10 minutes are elapsed.
I'd just like to say that the NDP is in it for you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Now we'll hear from Maria Lewins, running as an independent.
Hello. I wear this red dress tonight in honor of all the missing and murdered Indigenous women around Canada and the world. I would also like to acknowledge that we are on land that was never meant to be owned and was never meant to be broken, because it is broken. Politics is also broken. I think that's something we can all agree on. And to fix a broken system, you cannot rely on the same broken logic that was used to create it. So this election, I am challenging you to keep an open mind, listen without judgment, and imagine the possibilities of what life could be like if we allowed ourselves to think outside the box and demand better. My name is Maria Rose Lewins. I grew up on a mixed farm north of Shaunavon. Besides crops and cattle, we had a large garden, chickens, occasionally pigs, a handful of dairy cows before the creamery in Swift Current was shut down. I studied kinesiology at the University of Saskatchewan. I worked construction and then got into plumbing. Today and for the past 13 years, I've resided in Swift Current. Slowly, I have been transforming my yard into what I deem to be sustainable agriculture. On my city lot, I have 7 plum trees, 3 apple trees, 12 hascat bushes, 6 Saskatoon bushes, 7 currants, 2 hazel burnt nut shrubs. I have sour cherries, goji berries, sand cherries, grapes, perennial onions, asparagus, rhubarb, as well as many herbs, medicinal plants, and annual vegetables. When fully grown, my property will provide food and medicine not only for myself, but many others. The fiber produced from my plant stalks and leaves can be used for paper production. Branches from my willow can be used to weave baskets, and the bark as silicic acid, most commonly known as aspirin. When we start seeing what is around us as resources instead of problems, it opens up a world of possibilities. You see kochia as a weed, I see and I want to ask you, how do we really want to be living our lives? Do we really want people working in factories or sitting in front of computers? Or would we be happier if life was a little more laid back? Maybe our jobs could be restoring nature so the wildlife populations can rebound, and bring in opportunities to hunt for food as an occupation. What if we worked to keep pollutants out of our waterways so we can drink from them and ensure everyone has clean water? What if this also caused fish population to increase and your job was to fish? What if your job was to go for a hike and harvest wild berries? What if your job was to help prepare the food brought in by the hunters and fishers and harvesters? What if your job was to entertain for these people? What if your job was to observe the clouds so people can prepare for incoming weather? What if your job was to teach others how to preserve food and mend clothing? Or shear sheep, card and knit wool for clothing? What if we start working with nature instead of against it? Because let's face it, we will never win against nature. What if instead of hoping for a better world, we created a better world? What if we stopped waiting for government to do what is right and we just did it? What if we stopped thinking about what could go wrong and we started thinking about what could go right? What if we stopped judging each other and ourselves and started trusting and sharing and caring? What if we stopped saying what if and start saying we can? We can create a better world. We can get along. We can have utopia. And we deserve utopia. We were not created to be anxious, depressed, and stressed, yet that is becoming the norm in this world. And it comes in all forms of empty promises of an easier life, products that will make your life better, but instead cause more clutter and debt, promises of being more connected, but we no longer talk to our neighbors, synthetic chemicals and fertilizers that promise more food production, but only kill our soil and pollinators, pollute our waters, make us sick, and keep us more reliant on big companies. What are we teaching our children? And what kind of legacy are we leaving our children? More than ever, we need to resist the temptations and empty promises of those who only want your money, flooding the market with harmful and addictive products and substances. We're going to do this by creating a healthier and happier society, where we support each other instead of judging each other. We're going to learn gratitude for what we have and live with what is around us. We're going to restore our wetlands and plant trees and shrubs for food and resources. We're going to stop the clear cutting of our forests and stop allowing technology to do the work for us. I mean, really, what are we teaching our children nowadays? And what are we leaving our children? Junk food should be relegated to history. as well as televisions, computers, and cell phones. Let's start ripping up lawns and planting food. Let's allow land for small, sustainable communities to exist. Our goal should be to create places we do not need to escape from. Let's shut down industry as we work to create a way of life where vehicles do not exist. As we return back to the land, people will become stronger and healthier as pollutants are being eliminated from our environment and we live more active, less stressful lives. We will say no to genetically modified crops and animals and end factory farming. Why don't we rip up the asphalt, which makes our city oppressively hot in the summer? We could start with the valleys and flood zones so the water can be absorbed into the land instead of our basements. The solutions really aren't as complicated as we like to make them and we like to think. And the possibilities are endless when we allow ourselves to imagine what a better world could look like and allow ourselves to believe that it is possible. We deserve better, and it is about time we demand better. So we should send Ottawa a message, send the world a message that we are tired of being slaves to this corporate world that cares more about money than people. We are tired of being fed lies. What if we realize how powerful the masses can be when we unite and allow ourselves to believe? And what if we stop saying what if and start saying right now? We hold the power, and it's about time we use it. So I encourage you, vote for change, vote for hope, logic, and reason, and vote for freedom. Namaste.
Thank you, Ms. Lewins. And now, Bill Clary, representing the Green Party.
I'd also like to thank you folks for coming out here tonight and those that are tuning in live stream. It's so good to see so many faces that are engaged in this election. So about 2 days ago in Kindersley, at the All Candidates Forum that was put on by the Chamber of Commerce there, I had the opportunity to hear my fellow candidates speak, and I was struck by all the lovely things that we want to do for our fellow Canadians, colored, of course, by the various philosophies of our respective parties. What is clear to me is that we all want the very best for ourselves and for our fellow Canadians, and maybe even the broader humanity. So I asked myself, what are the things that set the Green Party apart from the three well-established parties and the newly formed party? All of us have a substantial gift list to help encourage you to entrust your vote to us. So context or circumstance matters. And I'd like to take the rest of my time to provide context for the comprehensive policies and platform offered by the Green Party, as well as what I would like to call attention to the shortcomings of the three well-established parties as well as the newly formed party. Now, I will suggest to you that some of the policies offered by the Conservative, Liberals, New Democrats, and the People's Party of Canada make sense today only if we engage in some degree of ignorance. Now, words matter. So it is important for me to make sure that the meaning of the word ignorance that I am using here, as defined in the dictionary, is understood. There are two meanings in the dictionary that I looked at. The first definition does not apply to my fellow candidates or the parties that they represent. And this definition is lack of knowledge or awareness in general, uneducated or unsophisticated. That does not apply here. But the one that it does apply, and I want to use, is, and the second definition is, that it's a lack of knowledge, information, or awareness of a particular thing. The particular thing that I am referring to is climate change in general, and in particular the work of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, that provides the context for the Green Party platform. The report tells us, in no uncertain terms, that the continued use of fossil fuel is destroying the very environment that we depend upon for our life. And so what is this IPCC? It was formed in 1988. It represents 195 member countries. And in quotes, they say it's dedicated to providing the world with an objective, scientific view of climate change, its natural, political, and economic impacts and risks, and possible response options. The report itself, with more than 6,000 scientific references cited, and the dedicated contribution of thousands of experts and government reviewers worldwide. And this important report testifies to the breadth and policy relevance of the IPCC, as well as there was 91 authors and review editors from 40 countries that prepared the IPCC report. This is sort of to try to indicate the veracity of what it is that these people are offering us as information. And now I'd like to make a couple of brief references from the report. And the report finds, and this is in quotes, the report finds that limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees would require rapid and far-reaching transitions in land, energy, industry, building, and cities. Global net human-caused emissions of carbon dioxide would need to fall by 45% from 2010 levels by 2030, reaching net zero by 2050. And the one other reference I'd like to make is, in quotes again, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees is possible within the laws of chemistry and physics, but doing so would require unprecedented change. The Conservatives, Liberals, the New Democratic Party do not come close in their climate change plans to meet the required changes. And the People's Party of Canada denies the climate change thing is a thing. The Green Party of Canada acknowledges the science, accepts the science, and embraces the science. And we have put together a platform as well as a document called Mission Possible to bring Canada into alignment with the science and at the same time achieve full employment and a robust social program while doing our part in keeping warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, I attribute some of the ignorance around climate change to the organized industry effort as far back as 1988, but ramped up in 1998, to deliberately sow doubt about the veracity of climate science, using the same method that the tobacco industry used to sow doubt about the link between cancer and tobacco. Actually, in many cases, they used the very same people that had worked in the tobacco campaign. And in some of the documents obtained, they identified success as, and this is a quote, average citizens understands, in quotes, recognizes uncertainty in climate science. Second sentence, recognition of uncertainty becoming part of the collective wisdom. So they wanted you to believe that the science didn't have the veracity that it has, so that you doubt it's real, so that when we have a discussion, that we can have two sides of that discussion. Well, climate change is real, and its impacts are already being felt right here in southwest Saskatchewan. And the Green Party is ready to take bold action to meet this most pressing issue and to begin to mitigate some of the worst impacts of climate change and live in a sustainable way in this new reality. I invite you to consider supporting the Green Party and this moral endeavor as we step into this new pivot point for our world. Again, thank you for coming out and sharing this time with us.
Thank you, Mr. Clary. Now, Lee Harding, representing the People's Party.
It's my pleasure to speak to you tonight. Thank you, each one of you, for coming to hear what we have to offer you in this very important election. I grew up in a small town near La Flèche, Saskatchewan called Milavale, and spent my first 18 years there. Thereafter, I got a degree at Briarcrest College in Cairnport, worked in the agricultural industry for 4 years, and then pursued a degree in journalism, during which I interned as a reporter with CBC and CTV, and to complete the hat trick, ended up being hired by Global. Thereafter, I was a spokesperson for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, which advocates for lower taxes, less government waste, and more accountable government. And in that capacity, I saw through efforts that were successful to reduce provincial taxes on a number of levels, especially the very punitive school property tax, especially on farmland. I spent time as David Anderson's personal assistant in Ottawa, his parliamentary assistant in the office there in 2010. And thereafter, I returned to Saskatchewan to spend 7 years working as an agent for Canadian Taxpayers Federation. And as such, got to visit people all over this constituency in a way that few people get to. And should I become the Member of Parliament here, I will know those areas and those people and those needs in some ways that few people would have the opportunity to be exposed to. I got my master's degree in public policy at the University of Calgary in 2016, and thereafter I had to step down from the job that followed, which was to be a researcher and writer for the Frontier Centre, which is a free market think tank in Western Canada. And lately I've been selling furniture at Ashley Home Stores, so we do what we do to get by, and I know that many of us here have not been getting by so well under the Trudeau government. And I don't need to explain to you what the problems have been with that one. But what I do want to tell you about is that I believe that Canada is in for an exciting decade. We are going to recover from this storm, and we are going to rebuild, and we're going to have the best Canada that we've had in a long time. There is an opportunity in front of us because Trudeau has turned 8 of the provinces into right-leaning governments. Jason Kenney is bringing equalization to the table because he wants to see some constitutional changes, and we could remake Canada in a better image than it has ever had. So where does the People's Party fit into this? Well, as you may know, 2 years ago there was a leadership race for the Conservative Party, and the 2 leaders were Maxime Bernier and Andrew Scheer. Bernier had been leading all the rounds until the final one, where Andrew Scheer won by less than 200 votes, and after which the ballots were destroyed, and it was discovered later there were more ballots cast than there were people to cast them. So this was never rectified or adequately explained, and a year later, Bernier concluded that the Conservative Party was too intellectually and morally corrupt to be reformed, and began the People's Party. And since then, we have become the fastest growing party in Canadian political history, boasting more than 42,000 members just 1 year later. 26 years ago, there was another Lee in an upstart party, Lee Morrison, with the Reform, and voters here chose to turn their backs on the incumbent PCs and to vote for the Reform Party. And I hope that you will have the openness to look at our platform and to consider what it is that we bring to the table. First of all, there are a number of things that we are trying to forward that no other party is. One of the most important ones is equalization. Now, as most of us here know, we have a system in Canada whereby the so-called have provinces give money to the have-nots. Well, the criteria for this is very Quebec-friendly, not coincidentally, and so they get 2/3 of the money. 4 other provinces receive the remainder, and Alberta, Saskatchewan, BC, Newfoundland, and now Ontario get nothing. Now, as our leader Maxime Bernier has said, this is very unfair. It is unfair, obviously, to the provinces that are doing the right things, developing their resources, keeping their taxes low, and therefore have a vibrant economy. The recipient provinces, though, are keeping their taxes high and the resources in the ground, partly because they know if they do otherwise, they will just get less money from Ottawa. No one is winning under this poverty trap. The Conservatives have invented this system. When they brought it in the mid-2000s, they bragged that it was the most generous in Canadian history, and they also brought in the mechanism that would make sure that it increased every year. So the People's Party stands uniquely alone in calling for radical changes there. And with Jason Kenney also calling for changes, it's important that we have a federal voice that is speaking for that, because this system is corrosive and not helpful to Canada. There are a number of policy things that I've just heard in the Conservative platform that are mild forms of the People's Party platform. Now, one thing that is the same is that we both want to get rid of the carbon tax. But we've heard also tonight that the Conservatives want to increase the exemption on capital gains tax. Well, we have said for quite a while now that we want the capital gains tax eliminated because it is a productivity killer. And as well, this area would be especially beneficial from such a change because we know that farmland has gone up substantially in recent years. So why does the government get all that money? From an increase in property values. Another thing is we want to stop the practice of taxpayer dollars going to corporations. We've heard about Bombardier, we've heard about Loblaws. We believe that it is not moral for a government to give money to private companies, to pick winners and losers. Because in the end, we all become losers from it. We should keep a free market, we should keep adequate but not overbearing regulation, taxes at the right level, and let the businesses sort themselves out. So unlike the Conservatives that want to reduce this by 25%, we want to eliminate it as a practice entirely, which would save $5 billion. As well, we want to reduce foreign aid to natural disasters and emergencies. And again, the Conservative Party wants to reduce it by 25% by some undefined means. I've met many Canadians that do not want to see our money thrown abroad for various politically correct causes. Some causes they may believe in, some they do not. Regardless, when we're running a deficit, it's really not our money to give. I remember talking to a family in Waldeck and talking about how we were the last party that wants to balance the budget this term. I said we want to balance it in 2 years. We said that before, we're maintaining that now. Andrew Scheer says he wants to balance it in 5, which is his way of telling you that he's not going to do that before the 2023 election that comes in 4 years. But I said, we want to balance the budget, and then I turned to this 9-year-old boy. I said, because otherwise, we're going to borrow $10 from you every day until you're our age. And he looked up at me with his little chubby face and said, I did not give you permission to do that. I did not say that you could do that. That's right. No one has asked these children, do we have permission to borrow from your future to overspend today? And if Canadians have money in their pockets, because the government has not taxed and spent it away, it will remain for whatever causes, at home or abroad, that they want to spend it on. You know, Andrew Scheer said in the debates he's pro-life, but strangely, he has forbid the party from ever doing anything about it explicitly. Well, we have said that we don't want to spend $400 million a year on the foreign abortions and contraception, some of which Alyssa Golub of Right Now has said are happening illegally in these countries. We're not going to spend money on that. We're not going to spend $2.3 billion on fighting climate change in Africa, when the needs of Africans are probably more urgent today than what the temperature might be in future years. So we have a more practical approach that is better rooted in reality. As far as immigration goes, we want to have reduced numbers. 49% of Canadians want that in a public opinion poll. They were asked about it. 31% wanted it kept the same. 6% said that they want more immigration, as the Trudeau government has proposed. So what we want to do is to, first of all, make sure that our border is secured. There are people who, if they did not go to an actual legal border crossing, would be turned back because they could get refugee status in the United States. But because they come over an unguarded crossing, we process them. It will usually cost $14,000 to claim. Many of the people, their claims have not been processed yet. Of those that have, 40% have been shown to not be refugees. And in the meantime, the provinces are paying for their health care, their welfare, and their education. So we believe it's important to have an approach to immigration that prioritizes, first of all, Canada's job needs, and that we don't have a system that is burdened so that we cannot take care of our seniors in future years. Much more to tell. Go to leeharding.ca to find out more.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Now, William Caton, representing the Liberal Party.
William Caton, Liberal candidate. I ranch with my wife Sherry and our 2 children, Sierra and Virgil. We run 400 head of mother cows on 9,000 acres of prairie grass. We have a trout stream behind the house, lots of white-tailed deer in the bush, and mule deer in the hills. We have pronghorn antelope, moose, badgers, hawks, eagles, and all kinds of songbirds. We live in a place that is as close to paradise as I can imagine. I would like to talk briefly about 3 topics: agriculture, the climate crisis, and pipelines. The ag sector in southwest Saskatchewan has some significant problems to deal with in the next few months. Trade wars and adverse weather conditions have combined to put many producers in a negative margin position. Market access issues are a huge problem. Countries are throwing up trade barriers: China for canola, beef, and pork, Italy for durum, and India for pulse crops. On top of this, we have serious transportation issues. The bottleneck at the West Coast is estimated to cost prairie farmers $10 billion by the year 2024. The Canadian grain industry is an export-oriented, trade-exposed sector. Beef and pork are also negatively impacted by closed borders. Fed cattle in feedlots and calves being sold off the cows are being sold seriously below break even. A new Liberal government will work at solving these problems with trade agreements like new NAFTA, CETA, and TPP, broadening existing markets and working to establish new markets for agricultural goods. A new Liberal government will also work with producers and farm organizations to develop safety net programs that actually work for producers. The climate crisis. Global warming is real, it is man-made, and it needs to be dealt with. We need to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Putting a price on these emissions will help reduce them. Despite the heated rhetoric about the so-called carbon tax, Saskatchewan households are actually getting a net cost saving. A household of 4 will save approximately $184 the first year and $527 by year 4. The rebate from the Climate Act incentive is larger than the estimated increase in energy costs. Pipelines. A Liberal government will continue to support the Southwest oil industry. A Liberal government will get the pipelines built. The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion will begin in the next construction season. Having access to world markets is critical. Without it, our oil is limited to only North American customers and suffers a price discount of about $20 a barrel. The Trans Mountain project will generate new business investments and thousands of construction jobs. And most of the pipe is coming from Evraz Steel in Regina. This project has undergone meticulous environmental and regulatory reviews, together with extensive consultations with Indigenous communities. Over 150 environmental conditions have been attached to ensure the project's integrity. Benefit agreements have been concluded with dozens of Indigenous communities. An Indigenous monitoring committee is in place. Extensive safeguards have been implemented to protect the oceans and marine life. A strong economy is essential to the well-being of all Canadians. A strong and healthy oil industry is an important part of that strong economy. A strong Canadian economy will help us make the switch to renewable energy, a future of green energy created by wind, solar, and thermal. The Canadian economy continues to show genuine strength. Canada's credit rating is AAA, and our federal debt to GDP ratio is the best in the G7. The Liberal Party of Canada believes in growth and prosperity for all Canadians, small business, and families. Just a few of the ways Liberal government in Ottawa has benefited the people of Saskatchewan. In 2005, the federal Liberals began to transfer a portion of the federal excise tax on gasoline directly to local municipalities. Municipalities set their own priorities for the use of these federal funds, which normally amount to about $62 million per year for all of Saskatchewan. For 2019, the Liberals have doubled that allotment. Saskatchewan municipalities are receiving $124 million this year from the federal gas transfer. Star helicopters provide crucial emergency medical services in Western Canada, a very important service for rural areas, remote areas, and Indigenous communities. The Liberal government is investing $65 million to help Stars purchase 5 new helicopters. The Liberals introduced and increased the Canada Child Benefit. They cut taxes for the middle class. First ever national housing strategy. More than 1 million new jobs since 2015, and Canada's lowest unemployment rate in 40 years. The Liberals have strengthened the Canada Pension Plan. They have increased the Guaranteed Income Supplement. They have lowered the small business tax to help small businesses grow and create more jobs. They have done the work so that 87 long-term boil water advisories in Indigenous communities have been lifted, and they are on track to eliminate all of them by 2021. The Liberals, if re-elected, will increase Canada's student grants by 40% to a maximum of $4,200. They will give students 2 years interest-free before they need to start repaying student loans, and only if they're earning at least $35,000. The choice in this election is to go backwards to the failed policies of Stephen Harper, or continue to go forward with Justin Trudeau and the Liberal team. Choose forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caton. Now we'll start the question period. We want to get to it as quickly as possible. We have 2 mics. I'm going to call this one the north mic and that one the south. I have no idea if that's correct, but your question should be of a generic reference, not to one of the candidates. We're going to have all candidates answer each of the questions. And so I'll recognize the north mic.
Is it on? Oh, it is. Hi, candidates. Thank you all for your time. My name is Courtney Stewart. My question is about abortion in Canada, and if you think abortion services should be more or less accessible, and how you would vote on any private members' bills to restrict legal abortions. Thank you.
We'll begin with Trevor Peterson.
The NDP policy is pretty straightforward. We believe in a woman's right to choose. But we are pro-life. Because once a baby is born, we believe that that child and that family needs to be fully supported with enough support for drugs, dental, head-to-toe healthcare, affordable housing, all the supports needed for education, whether it's a single parent. So, like I said before, our policy is pretty straightforward on abortion. We are pro-life, we are pro-choice, but we will support families. and support that child. And like I said before, we are working towards totally publicly funded university, so a child can go from kindergarten to career without any barrier of cost. And so yes, we would vote against any private member bill on limiting abortion.
Ms. Lewins?
Abortion, eh? I think right now in this world, we're pretty sheltered right here in the Southwest. There's a lot of wealth, which isn't in a lot of other places. And, well, I guess there's a lot of, I shouldn't say that, I guess I don't. A lot of people grow up in situations that aren't ideal, and it makes them really hard for children. I wouldn't want to ever be in that position, and I wouldn't want to ever judge somebody who chooses to make that choice. As far as restricting it, I do think people should have the right, again, to make choices without judgment. I don't think that's helping anybody. And I ideally will work to create a healthier society where those choices don't need to be made because people will be supported. But for now, I don't think it's something government should be restricting and making judgments on.
Okay. Mr. Clary?
Thank you. Thanks for the question, Courtney. I won't need 2 minutes. The government doesn't belong in making a decision about a woman's body and what she's doing with her body. So it's simple, it's clear. We don't belong anywhere near that kind of a question.
Thanks for the question. Am I coming through? Good. I was just hours from being aborted in 1974. My dad had left my mom. My mom was in psychiatric care because he was abusive. The doctors had scheduled an abortion for her. My grandmother had a dream the night before where my mom was an 8-year-old girl holding a baby. Actually, it was a doll in the dream. The next scene, her head was down, her arm was empty. She says, "Where's your dolly, Debbie?" And she looked up in tears in the dream and said, "They took it away." They drove to Regina, said to her, "Debbie, do you want this baby?" She said, "Yep." So she went to the doctors, my grandma did, and said, "You can't play God and neither can I. Come on, Debbie, we're coming home with our baby." So I'm in this world. And when the Supreme Court Justice in 1988 struck down the abortion law, she said, at some point, the rights of the fetus supersede the rights of the mother, and it's up to Parliament to decide when that is. There have been attempts at that. The last one failed in the Senate. The House of Commons agreed, but the Senate was a tie, and so we're just basically in a legislative void. So Laura Lynn Thompson, who is a PPC candidate in Red Deer, has proposed a bill that would limit abortion. It would restrict it to basically ban it after 24 weeks, except for extenuating circumstances for certain, rape or incest, or for if the life or health of the mother was being physically risked. I do support that. It's at preborn.ca.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. William Caden?
I'm personally pro-choice, and I'll always vote against any private member's bill that is put forward to restrict the availability of abortion.
Recognize the south mic.
Jeremy. Oh.
Yeah, so the Conservative Party's stance right now on abortion is that we will not reopen the debate and that there will not be private members' bills going forward in regards to abortion. I think one of the biggest issues is that the conversation has become that abortion is the only choice. I think we need to make sure that people have informed choices presented to them, whether it be adoption services for families who cannot have their own children, to see if that is an option as well. Yeah, it's become a very polarizing topic in our society, and hopefully it's one where we can just engage in a more balanced, positive conversation where it doesn't become basically a hateful rhetoric debate.
Thank you. Recognize the south mic.
Thank you. My name is Tammy Khalif. I'm a press and media coordinator with Swift Current Ministerial Association Refugee Committee. I doesn't. I wanted to ask. All the parties have some plan of immigration and refugee, but no one is actually hitting the spot talking about it. The People's Party, my question is for everyone, but I don't require an answer by the People's Party because I already know their answer. But for everyone, we're looking forward to build the future. How you gonna achieve that by tying immigration to lower points and lower percentage? Refugee cross the border because they don't have a choice. They are prosecuted and don't have status in the state. So my question now, how do you achieve those numbers? We are doing our 0.9% to guarantee our generation to live, to survive. How do you gonna achieve that number by cutting down immigration if we have a low birth Canadian, and also as a duty to other human and another being a Christian, and how can you stand on not helping people? You speak of private refugee, sponsored refugee. There is a plan. We work with the government that we have a blended visa. Most of our refugee come through it. So now we're talking about cutting down the blended visa and going to only private sponsorship.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't mean to cut you short, but we want to hear from the candidates on your question. It's an important question. We want to hear from all the candidates, so we'll start with Ms. Lewins.
I think right now perception is everything when we look at an issue. And we can see things as problems or just look at them as situations to work through. In this world, historically, many people have had to run from situations. A lot of the people in Canada have been here because their ancestors fled from war and overpopulation and pollution. Right now, I would find it really hard to turn anybody away that's in need from horrifying conditions. And I think part of it too is because the way we live here, I do think contributes to a lot of those conditions in some of the countries. So I think what we need to do is just work on solutions and how we can make this world better and just truck forward on that. And a lot of these issues will iron out themselves.
Sorry, I missed your name, but thank you for the question. What was it, sorry? Sammy. Hey, Sammy, thanks. When the Green Party gets elected to government and we start a significant transformation of our energy system, we're going to need a huge amount of people to do that work, and there aren't enough Canadians to do that work. So we have a great opportunity to increase substantially our immigration policy in order to bring people on board to help us make this transition to a renewable energy system in our country. So I envision that we will have a substantial amount more immigration just because of our need. And we also have to deal with the fact that the impacts of climate change, which we've all been very seriously involved with, particularly in the Western world, in terms of our carbon output, are very much have a significant role in terms of the responsibility for the impacts of that climate change. And so there's going to be a substantial amount of what they call climate refugees, where they are living in a place that is no longer livable. And that we have some moral obligation, I think, is what you're saying. That we have some moral obligation to bring on refugees because of the way in which we've engaged our environment.
The question is help or not help. I think the answer is obviously help, but it's not as straightforward a consideration as that. 44% of the homeless shelters in Toronto basically have the migrants. What we said as a party is we want to double the number of economic immigrants, but we want to cut off family reunification for the parents and the grandparents, that we want working age people. We are going from 4.3 workers per retiree down to 2.9 in the next 20 years. And we are going to see a tremendous pressure on our pensions, on our healthcare system, and yes, we do need people to work to fill those jobs and those economic needs. So yes, help versus help not help is a very clear choice, but it's just not so clear cut. We want to be open, we want to be welcoming, but at the same time we've taken in more refugees than any country in the world since 2017, more than the European Union, more than the United States, and I want you to go home and check those facts.
Wait a second, just 1 second. I appreciate that you want to chime in and debate, but it's what it is you're here to hear from the candidates and get what they're about. So they'll give their information, and if we could respect their positions, at least in providing it to us so we know where we want to vote. Thank you, Mr. Harding.
Thank you.
I think the Liberal Party policies on immigration and refugees are fair now, and their numbers, if anything, could be increased because we could take more. We're going to have a booming economy going forward. We need more people to work, and with all the refugees in the world, I think there's room for more. And I actually think it's a good idea for refugees and immigrants to bring over their parents and grandparents.
Trying to set a number on how much immigration should be and how many refugees we should bring into Canada is wrong. The Conservative Party wants to make sure, the number that we're focused on is making sure that our immigration offices are staffed to be able to properly handle the claims that are coming through. It's vastly understaffed right now, so we can't even offer the proper supports to the immigrants that are trying to come into Canada. And it's not doing right by Canadians, it's not doing right by immigration standards either, right? So we need to make sure that we have a system in place that can properly handle and process immigration claims as they're coming through and refugee claims. And Canada is a country, historically, where we have done a great job of welcoming immigrants and refugees into Canada. And that's the record that we're gonna hang our hat on, is making sure that we are there to support Canadians and supporting other countries and people, especially when they're in need and need our help.
Now the problem with that just last statement is that we have a policy here from the Conservatives that they want to cut 25% of our foreign aid. You can't speak out of both sides of your mouth. Now, what's so great about living in rural Saskatchewan? It is family. So I'm going to have to disagree with Lee. It is pretty straightforward and simple. Canada is stronger when we keep families together and help newcomers contribute to our communities. Trudeau talks a big game on immigration, but their government's policies are keeping families apart and leaving newcomers and refugees behind. Newcomers to Canada are still more likely to work at low-paying jobs and struggle to find work in their fields. Conservatives are playing politics and trying to divide people with immigration. So we need to focus on policies that work for everyone. Keeping families together through fast family reunification that includes grandparents. Helping immigrants contribute to the economy by improving foreign credential recognition. doing our fair share to welcome refugees fleeing violence and persecution. Thank you.
And thank you for your answers. I'll recognize the north mic.
My name's Megs Reynolds, and I'm a grain farmer. I want to start by thanking everyone who is here tonight. And a couple comments. Maria, you talk about a utopian society where we spend 70% of our time creating the food that we need to eat. I was in Germany last week, and I spoke with a farmer from Nigeria who wishes she has the tools that I am able to apply on my farm. William, you talk about all of the trade agreements that the Trudeau government has put in place. I'd like to bring light to the fact that Harper started them. So as a grain farmer, I want to know what you guys are going to do for trade agreements, for economy, because this is a riding that depends on oil and gas, on agriculture, on manufacturing, and on small business. And those are key elements to allowing us to thrive. Now, the last 4 years have been extremely hard on all of those different sectors. And I don't see anyone that has really spoken to how we're going to move forward with those 4 pieces. So right now, as a grain farmer, there is not anything that I'm growing on my farm that's not facing a trade barrier or a tariff. So I would like to hear from all of you on how you propose to move forward with our trade agreements, globally and domestically, and our economy. Thank you.
Mr. Clary.
Well, as I presented earlier, Meg, was it Meg? Yeah. Thanks for the question. As I spoke about earlier, you know that my position with the gas and oil industry, we have to stop burning fossil fuel. And so the gas and oil industry is going to have to be closed off. That can't occur immediately. The Green Party's plan is to provide training for the folks that work in that industry. Another important thing for the Green Party is sustainable farming. And a lot of the approach that we currently take to farming, I don't know what your community's like, but in Leader, there used to be hundreds of farmers. And now there's double-digit number of farmers that farm. Sorry? Size? Well, actually, I would probably differ with you in that, because the, size requires a whole different style of farming in terms of chemicals, the inputs that are involved, whereas the smaller farm, if you have a large enough farm that you can manage with rotation.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry. Wait. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's not a debate.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry.
We'll just
sorry
have to hear
engage
their
you.
answers and. Yeah. No, but we'll
Okay.
wait for them to answer, and then that'll give you the information on where you want to put your vote.
Yeah. And I don't think I have much more to offer there, but thanks for your question.
This was a lot the same question that we saw at the federal debate, and we really didn't see it answered there either. We obviously need to have some aggressive diplomacy on this matter, and to really make it a priority, because it is very vital to us, and especially in this region, but also to our national interests. The difficult part is that we are grappling with the changing world. It's not the Cold War world, and it's another change yet where China is really asserting itself, and we're sort of caught in the wake of a giant battle between the dragon of China and the Trump America. And I think that if any Canadian politician thought that they were going to have a substantial role in that battle, they would probably be overestimating their ability. I think we need to do all we can, but we need to recognize that we are having an emerging world superpower that is against the one that is struggling to maintain its place, that there's a lot of trade issues and intellectual property issues that are involved, and a lot of geopolitics. So I think that we have to do all that we can, and also not just in having free and fair trade in the world, but even within our own provinces. And our party is one that really wants to address this, because we have $100 billion of the Canadian economy that is lost each year because of interprovincial trade barriers. It's like a 7% tariff between each province.
I agree. Most people in agriculture are in a crunch, and it's going to hit hard in the next 3 or 4 months. We're all selling our products below break-even, below break-even prices. And the big thing is we have to trade. Aggressive diplomacy is definitely the first answer. But until these countries that are stopping our products from coming in open up and let us export to the levels we have been for the last 2 or 3 or 4 years, we have to have a federal government that will put safety nets back in place, the safety nets that were gutted by the Harper government. And the Liberal government stands ready to rebuild those safety nets and keep us all going till they get the borders opened in these different countries again.
Bill, maybe at some point in time you could explain to Megs how agriculture is going to work without fossil fuels and how we're going to be able to get our seed in the ground and get the crops off in the fall. Definitely, yeah, those trade relationships, those are of vast importance, right? I mean, we've looked at all the different countries that have been lost. We've lost markets, and people are taking a hit at that. And like Meg said, your rotations are built on a 4-year plan. Lots of times that seed's bought well in advance. You don't get to just buy your seed immediately right before you seed it, right? You're planning it ahead. And to all of a sudden have your a 40% market in China for canola just gone like that, we got to make sure we're working on those markets. We've got to keep negotiating. We got to make sure that we actually get our ministers into those countries and working and building on those trade relationships. The Liberal government did absolutely nothing as our bans on canola were taken. Tariffs put on from India, whether it was Jagmeet Singh not being able to stop talking about supporting this terrorist group in India, and that's what got the initial tariffs going on our crops that we trade and sell to India, and then Justin obviously went and made those matters worse. And yeah, with Italy not accepting our durum or in a limited capacity, right? I mean, those are some huge markets that we have lost. So we need to work on those markets. We need to be actively engaged in trade relationships. We need to work with our producers because our producers are the ones that are working in the industry. And there's good groups that are out there that are advocating on behalf of producers. And we need to work with them because they are the ones that have the right information and how we can proceed.
When we have Liberal and Conservative governments deal on trade deals, they've got one thing in mind: standing up for their corporate backers and their profits. We need to quit negotiating away protections for farmers in these trade deals. Okay? Another example would be who the Liberals really have in charge of the Canadian Grain Commission right now. Somebody that used to work for Cargill. We need to protect the mandate of the Canadian Grain Commission. One of the last things in the system that are standing up for farmers at the port. Okay? We need to also look at the Canadian plant breeding and how we need to continue to protect that so farmers aren't paying more and more for their seed, so that the grain costs for wheat don't become the costs that they are for canola. Also, if we look at holding the railways accountable to get our grain to market, okay, we used to have an organization that did that and stood up for farmers. We don't have that anymore. We sold it to the Saudis. The other thing I would like to say is with William, this is a perfect example. When we had the BSE crisis, we know we had meatpacking corporations that were taking advantage of farmers during that crisis. There was one party that stood up in Ottawa and wanted those companies to open up their books. And there was 2 parties that voted against it. So we need a party in Ottawa that will stand up for farmers and do trade negotiations with the farmers in mind.
I think trade is not meant to be a way of life. Trade is something you do when you have excess of a product. I think we need to move to a localized economy where we're producing for ourselves and producing for our neighbors. I think we want to eventually eliminate international trade. It is said that agriculture is responsible for 70% of habitat destruction, and that's going on in this world. So I think we really need to rethink how we do agriculture. I don't think it's sustainable at all. I don't think spraying toxic chemicals on the ground is sustainable. It kills soil microbiology. It kills the earthworms. We're only as healthy as our soil, and right now our soil's on life support. It's no wonder we have so much illness in this world. So I think we have to look at there's regenerative and organic agriculture, which can be implemented immediately. We don't have to have a transition phase. It can be done immediately. And this is why I do food
Excuse me.
foresting and permaculture, because I think this is small scale. If we get people out of cities and out of offices and back to the land. In Paris in 1845, 9,000 people were employed as gardeners. They fed the whole city. So we have to rethink what we think about food production and how we're doing it. Because right now we have fertilizer that started being applied to our crops because it was leftovers from the war industry and the explosive factories. We have chemicals we spray on on our crops that were neurotoxins that were used to kill people in the war. Like, they had to rebrand this industry and they forced it on people. We had a sustainable way of producing food before, and we have completely lost our path in life. And I think we need to shrink down, go to a localized way, because trade is highly volatile, highly stressful, and it's not a healthy way of life.
Okay, I will recognize thank you for the question, and thank you for the answers. Recognize the South, Mike.
Hello, my name is Brandon. I want to thank you all for letting your names stand and putting all the hard work in that you're putting in. It's a ton of work. I appreciate it. Personally, I'm not a believer or denier of global warming or of climate change. I don't run a lot of scientific tests on these things. I don't think I have the credibility to speak to it. So most of the parties talk about looking internally to Canada to lower our emissions, when Canada on the global stage is less than 2% of global emissions. I've heard the Conservatives mention they're kind of more concerned about helping global emissions reduced. The question is, what is your party going to do to help reduce global emissions? Thank you.
Mr. Harding.
Short answer is not a heck of a lot. We're calling to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. Even if all the signatory countries followed through with their commitments, which never happens, the net effect by the year 2100, if we were to continue at this for the next 80 years, would be 0.023 degrees. We have 1.6% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So if we were to stop turning every ignition, put out every fire, keep all the furnaces off, put a gas mask on all of our cows, it would be 1.6%. So whatever's going to happen out of this is coming, and we need to look more at adaptation than prevention. Another thing is, if we were to pursue it at that angle, it's not like there'd be nothing to do. There was a study done in 2018 where they looked at the main climate models, and the heat that they were projecting was twice as much as evidence is really warranted from carbon. But even if we were to concede for a moment that that was real, the amount of agricultural land that Canada could potentially gain would be twice the size of Quebec. That's just the part that is gained. So Canada and Russia could be big winners. There's lots of talk about storms coming through this kind of thing. Many of the leading meteorologists don't believe that the evidence bears out for that. And we're not going to settle the dispute on science here, but I've answered your question and I'll leave it at that.
There's one statistic you quoted in your question that is misleading. You say that Canada, and it's 1.8, less than 2, they only produce 1.8% of the emissions in the world. But if you look at the graphs of the countries that are the worst producers, China's the worst, the United States is second, European Union's third, India's fourth, and on down the way, Canada is the 9th worst producer, or produces the most carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas of all the countries. What, 200 countries, 190 countries in the world? So the problem is here. Per capita, as a country, we produce more carbon dioxide than anybody else in the world. In Canada, we're We're the villains, we're the culprits for the warming of the climate. And if you take it even farther than that, Saskatchewan is the worst producer in Canada. So right in Saskatchewan, we're the worst offenders for putting too much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and into the water, into the oceans of anybody in the world. So the problem does start here, and the Liberal government has a plan. We're going to the carbon pricing. The evidence is California, Quebec, BC, they've pushed the emissions down. It's the start, and with the booming economy, the Liberals are going to turn Canada into a green country in the next 4 years. Solar panels, wind turbines, and thermal.
Our agriculture producers right now in Saskatchewan alone sequestered 9.46 million tons of carbon dioxide, and that is the equivalent of removing 2 million cars off of the highway. I think we need to give credit to our farmers and also to our ranchers for doing their part. They take care of the soil. It is their livelihood, and they are doing a fantastic job of taking care of our environment. The Conservative Party has a real plan that is not involved around taxing people, because taxing people obviously doesn't do anything except for make everything more expensive. And trying to hand that money back out to people, that's picking winners and losers as well, and our small businesses that end up paying for that the most. Our plan is centered around green technology, and like Brandon said, it's about taking the climate, it's about taking that global. We can develop green technologies here in Canada. We already have some that are existing in carbon capture, and we can promote those around the world because, like we've said from a few different people, 1.6 to 1.8% of emissions in the world is Canada. If we went completely dark for 1 year, it would take China 21 days to match what we just eliminated in 1 year. So again, we're going to invest in green technology, and that'll provide jobs and economic growth as well. But it also it gives us a chance to sell it around the world, and because again, we're not the real issue here when it comes to pollution.
I agree, grain farmers and cattle farmers do their part. I also think that it's not about villains. It's not about dividing people. We're one world, and we all have to do our part. And I'm thinking that grain farmers, cattle farmers, and people that work in our oil field, I'm betting on them to lead the world in the transition to a green economy. With the proper supports in place, we can lead the world. We may not produce much of the world's greenhouse gases overall, but we can still lead the transition to a green economy. And how we can do this is by supporting our workers and our producers and our small businesses. Now, a perfect example of this would be the carbon tax. The carbon tax can take many different forms. Okay? But if the carbon tax was implemented in the agriculture industry, and all of the money collected in the entire sector of agriculture, whether from fertilizer companies, transportation companies, railways, grain handling companies, all the money collected from climate change in the agriculture sector should be rebated to the farmer, because it's the farmer with the proper supports are the ones that we can count on to make the proper changes to transition to a green economy, and that's just one example. Okay. The other ones I've mentioned already, we can create 300,000 new jobs in the first mandate with supporting workers. Okay. We have to make sure that when people want to transition to a different job and they quit the one they're at, they can still get employment insurance when they quit that job so that they can go back to school and collect employment insurance at the same time when training for a new job.
The introduction of purple prairie clover to a cattle's diet will dramatically reduce its methane emissions, so we might not need gas masks on them. But it said 20% of the world consumes 80% of the resources, and we are part of that 20% of the world. So a lot of the Pollution in China is coming from them producing cheap products for us to consume. So if we consume their products, we're also responsible for the pollution that it took to make those. So we shouldn't think we're little angels here sitting in Canada and that our actions and behavior has no impact on the rest of the world. What we can do to help with climate change there is planting more trees, we gotta eliminate people are ripping out the tree rows. We have to stop that. Start planting more trees, start rehabilitating our wetlands. They're essential not only for purifying our water, but providing habitat and water for our wildlife. They'll help with drought mitigation and help with salinity problems in the soil. And we have to use our resources responsibly now. It's not completely eliminating, but look, do we really need leaf blowers, or can people learn how to use a broom? You know, and I'm quite serious. We need to stop. Maybe we need to get rid of snow blowers, hey? Hire that kid down the street to use a shovel, right? Maybe no more recreational speedboats. No more Olympics. We're wasting our resources on games. No more auto racing or professional sports. Let's end the space program. What are we doing that for? So some billionaires can escape when we ruin this planet? I mean, maybe we don't need any more new houses when we have over 500 consistently in Swift Current. There are empty houses everywhere, and we keep build. Eventually, we got to say, what are we doing? We're just running around with our heads in the sand, and all we are is if somebody was looking down, they just see a bunch of asses, right? I mean, and I don't mean that to insult. I'm just we really have to seriously think about how we're living on this planet. It's ridiculous with addiction and stress. Sorry.
Thanks for your question, Brandon. If you're a non-believer or a denier, I would recommend you take a read of the IPCC report. There's a version of it that's only about 32 pages. I think it lays out pretty clearly in pretty clear terms that climate change is a real thing. And in terms of what it is we're going to do here in Canada, the suggestion that we contribute such a small amount, so maybe there's nothing for us to do, seems to me kind of like sandbox diplomacy, where everybody in the sandbox is throwing sand at each other. And there's no adult in the room that says, let's just stop throwing the sand. And so we, particularly in the southwest corner, we've got an ideal place for solar. We got some of the best market for developing sun and wind. Right here in southwest Saskatchewan, we can be an example to the world. And you're not guaranteed ever to change anybody's hearts or minds. But when we can be the adults in the room, when we can take a mature approach towards the way in which we're engaging our environment, then I think that we've done the best that we can. And again, there are factors that are out of our control, but I think taking the moral high ground gives us the best chance to be successful.
Thank you. We're actually just over time, but I'd like to have one more question. That gentleman over there has been standing for about a half hour. So if we could just have, I apologize to the two of you over here, but I'm going to recognize the south mic, and that would be the last question for tonight. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Stuart Wells, and we farm just east of Swift Current. There's been several references to Stephen Harper and Saudi Arabia tonight. And one of them was about Saudi Arabia's human rights record. The other one was about the so-called sale of the Canadian Wheat Board that Stephen Harper made to Saudi Arabia. Stephen Harper did not sell the Canadian Wheat Board to Saudi Arabia. He gave away the farmer-paid assets that the Canadian Wheat Board owned. And Stephen Harper did not start the agricultural trade agreements, but one of the things he did do in his mandate was he started selling arms to Saudi Arabia, this country that has this horrible human rights record, where a reporter who shows up at one of their embassies ends up disappeared. According to official reports, he was strangled and then cut up and disappeared in that embassy. The question is pretty straightforward. If you become the MP after this election and you're representing the people in southwestern Saskatchewan, would you support continuing to be a leading arms dealer to Saudi Arabia?
And I think William Caton.
No, I would not.
No, I don't. How can we justify being a leading arms dealer in the world?
Is that not a contradiction of what the Liberals and Conservatives have been doing with Saudi Arabia? I know the NDP government would definitely not.
Not only should we not sell it, we should end the manufacturing of any military weapons, ammunitions, and vehicles.
Thanks for the question, Stuart. We definitely shouldn't be selling arms to Saudi. And if we start to look at our whole international engagement or foreign affairs, I think we'd also have to take a serious look, not only the arms that are going to Saudi Arabia, but the arms that are going to Israel. That there's a lot of places in the world where there's very questionable activity that's going on with utilizing Canadian military equipment. And I think that we should be having a more robust discussion about our engagement in the world around weapons of death.
And I too would like to see a better human rights record from Saudi Arabia before we would make those kind of arrangements with them.
Thank you very much. That concludes our questions, and again, I apologize to those who didn't get to answer the questions, but we're well over time now. So.
All right, folks. Well, on behalf of your local chamber, thank you very much to Mr. Steve Kreitzer for moderating this evening's forum. We very much appreciate your time and your expertise. Thank you so much. Also, many thanks to each and every candidate for attending and for your willingness to serve our community in the upcoming federal election. We appreciate your time and thoughts as well. Thank you to all. I would also like to thank Living Sky Casino for providing the venue for this evening's event, and to Snowstreaker Media and Ryan Schweitzer, who are live streaming. So if you know folks who haven't been able to attend, check out our website, Snowstreaker's website, and encourage them. They can watch the video and the comments from each of the candidates. So thank you, Ryan, and to Living Sky Casino. And a quick reminder that advance polls open tomorrow and will carry on through to Monday, and Election Day is October 21st, and it's important to remind everyone that you know that every vote does count. Thank you very much to all for attending this evening.